day after the shotcrete was done, we started on the office apps. First we had to make some space to work, so we started clearing away some of the bracing on the quad deck. We also wanted those 2x2s to make some jigs. The goal was to weld the legs on tangentially. We knew the steel arches were 180 degrees because we had trimmed the arc length to pi times the radius. So we just needed to weld the legs on parallel. In this case that's the same as square, so we just squared up the corners by making the diagonals equal. Then we assembled the truss jig to hold it that way. Weld, and then flip and weld again. The next arch piece still needed its ends cleaned off before welding. We might as well clean up all the arches. And also all the legs. In addition to cleaning off the rust at the ends of each bar, we also chamfered the ends a bit so that the welding was easier. With the truss jig already sized to make the bars parallel, the further measurements were just a quick and easy confirmation. It was great that I could leave Hunter to handle all of this while I took care of other things. Once the arch components were ready, we could take them over to the office location. First I marked the perimeter on the footing, along with where each steel arch would need to be placed. Hunter then drilled the 5/8 inch holes for the rebar pegs. Then he could work on making the angle iron brackets for the feet of the arches. These were then welded to the rebar pegs that had already been hammered into the holes. Meanwhile, each arch was cut in half. We set up the scaffolding and got the welder up in the right place. Setting up the ribs was all about just getting them plumb and then aimed toward the center. We had a bit of a gap in the middle so that I wouldn't need to do any fancy cuts. And we just spanned things with scraps of tube or rebar just to hold it in roughly the right spot. The next weekend we came back and started on the rebar. We started with the horizontal rungs, spacing them 1 foot apart, and then welded as we went. It went pretty smoothly. Eventually Hunter got started on drilling the footing for the vertical rebar, while I was finishing off welding the horizontal rebar. The vertical pieces were only half curved. Basically, you measure out how far you want to be straight, 3 feet in this case, and then you just start the curve after that. Welding them on was pretty simple. We just used clamps to hold them in the right position. After getting the window in place and plumb, we also framed that in rebar. By the next weekend, snow had hit, so we shifted to other work for a couple months. We had a warm week at the beginning of February, so Sherry went out there, mostly on her own, and without setting up the camera, and added all the lath. This is actually the only picture I have of it, but you can see the procedure, how we did it in other clips. We still need to add the electrical, etc., and we'll call the shotcrete crew out in the spring. But first we also want to prep a few other areas. To be continued.